Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto Was the Red X. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. Before we get into it though, check out Bilibili Comics. Bilibili Comics is the official trusted place to read hit exclusive series from top creators. Bilibili Comics is a great online webtoons and webcomics reader among all reading apps. Enjoy the best new comics, manhwa, and exclusive webtoons on Bilibili Comics. Download the app now and jump right into it. The link is in the description. Now let's start this video. Jump City. It had been a couple days since Raven's birthday, and unfortunately there was seemingly no sign of the masked madman. Currently however, a familiar man in a bat costume is kneeling down at the scene of a murder. I sure wish Satana was here, this kind of thing is more her specialty. A man in a red costume known as the Flash notes to himself while looking around, Batman silently picking up a long silver hair from the floor and narrowing his eyes onto it for a moment. Why are we here again? The Flash wondered aloud while scratching his head and got a flat look from Batman. I mean I know why we're here, but isn't Jump City more Titans territory? The Flash questions while looking to Batman, the Dark Knight silently placing the silver hair into a case before stowing it into his belt. It is, but Dr. Fate wanted us to check up on some of the old members of the cult of Scath in Jump City, for a connection to the recent happenings in Jump. Batman replied, and Flash grimaced before looking to the side where a man was headless, a hand sliced off as well. You mean how Deathstroke came back from the grave, right? The Flash questioned and saw Batman visibly tense. Batman had never liked leaving a master assassin like Deathstroke to the Titans. It had actually been Green Lantern's idea originally, more or less as a way to toughen them up. Batman had remained silent about it, but he generally disliked the thought of them trying to face him on their own, although they had proven their mettle in the end. Exactly. Batman replied while checking around in drawers and boxes for any sign of the Ring of Azar. Which also explains all headless over there. The Flash noted while Batman walked over to the body and scowled deeply. Kneeling down beside of it, he then started checking the body for any other, less noticeable wounds, and narrowed his eyes. None. It had been one strike, one blow, and the man was instantly down. He hadn't retaliated or anything. It was a clean kill. Whomever did it was skilled. He didn't even know what hit him. The assassin came in quickly and killed him in one move. Looks like she also took his hand, which probably means he had a Ring of Azar, if what Dr. Fate told us about them is true. Batman noted, and the Flash blinked for a moment before staring at the Dark Knight. And how do you know it's a girl who did this? The Flash questioned and Batman turned to give him a look. I know. He replies cryptically while standing up and then crossed his arms. So how come no one's noticed this guy was killed yet? I know this town is big and all, but people in Gotham are noticed sooner than this. The Flash noted while looking around, the home being depressing, as it was dark, dank, and looked like something out of a horror flick. John Doe here was a notable recluse. He disappeared for days on end on a fairly common basis. Besides that, 7 other murders in town are being investigated. Batman replies before reaching up and hitting the side of his mask, activating the detective mode of his mask's lenses while looking around. And how do those murders involve this exactly? Flash questioned and for a moment Batman mentally wished he had a more astute partner, or at least someone who didn't ask so many questions. Each of the murders was a known member of the Order of Scath. Batman replied cryptically, and the gears in the Flash's head started to turn before a frown crossed his features. Meaning that someone out there is targeting the members of the cult specifically. The Flash realized and Batman silently nodded his head before walking around and narrowed his eyes on a wall. So then we don't have to worry about these guys bringing about the apocalypse or anything, right? The Flash questioned while Batman walked to the wall and followed his detective vision over to a panel and pressed down on it, stepping back as the wall suddenly rose up into the ceiling. No, it's not good. The Ring of Azar for each member is notably missing. Batman finally replied before walking down a long flight of stairs, the Flash following suit behind him. So someone isn't killing them. Well, they are, but they're doing so to take their rings, rather than stop them from bringing about the apocalypse. The Flash guessed and Batman nodded his head mutely while they wandered down. I don't get it, what's so special about these rings that someone would kill for them? The Flash asked and Batman frowned while crossing his arms over his chest. A Ring of Azar. They were originally forged by the same order who imprisoned Trigon eons ago, as a way of protecting themselves from his demonic power. The rings were eventually collected by the Order of Scath, as a means of keeping anyone from using them against Trigon. Over the centuries, they were passed down the familial lines of the Order from father to son or mother to daughter. Their true purpose lost to time. Batman explained and the Flash's head snapped over to the Dark Knight. Whoa, wait, Trigon. You mean as in Trigon the Terrible? That Trigon? The Flash demanded and Batman nodded his head mutely, a scowl on his face. What do I mean, how's he a part of this? I thought this cult worshipped some Scath thing. The Flash noted and Batman nodded his head silently before answering. The warrior of Scath used the name to protect the true name of their master, Trigon the Terrible, an extra-dimensional demon with the power and cruelty to destroy whole worlds. Batman replied, and the Flash grimaced before frowning as he crossed his arms. Yeah, and Big Blue is weak against magic, and the like Trigon could literally crush him. The Flash noted and Batman remained silent as they came to the bottom of the stairs, Batman narrowing his eyes, while the Flash grimaced. Oh, this can't be good. The Flash realized as he saw a strange room covered head to toe in glowing blood-red runes and seals of some kind. No, it's not. I'll have Dr. Fate bring in Jason Blood to study these symbols to determine their purpose. But if my hunch is correct, it's necromancy of some kind. Batman says while turning away from the room, the Flash nodding his head as he follows behind the Dark Knight. So what's our next move? Flash questioned and Batman frowned in thought for a few moments before mentally sighing. I'm heading back to the watchtower to run a few tests to see if I can find a match to a hair I found. You head to the tower and locate Raven, Dr. Fate wants to talk to her. Batman replies and the Flash stares at the man for a moment. Why don't you just come with, I'm sure Titan's tower has. He starts to ask only for Batman to interrupt him. Batman to watchtower, one to beam up. Batman states flatly before vanishing in a flash of light, leaving the Flash to stand there confused. Blinking for a moment and then raising a brow, the Flash wonders why Batman wouldn't want to go to Titan's tower before grimacing slightly. Oh right, the issues with Nightwing. He mumbles to himself before sighing and zipping off towards Titan's tower. He needed to check on Kid Flash anyways. Titan's tower. Nightwing frowns as he pulls a couple uniforms from his closet and lays them, and an array of his gadgets out on his bed. Looking around, he soon finds a black backpack and places it onto his bed as well. Folding his uniforms and stowing them into the backpack, he then starts to put his gadgets in as well. Reaching to the side, Nightwing then fastens his belt around his waist and walks to his bedside table, where a couple extra masks and his bow staff await. As he does, the door to his room opens and the rest of the Titans walk in, though Donna has to help Kid Flash inside. Nightwing, you are leaving us. Starfire questions while Night reaches to the side and grasps his bow staff and collapses it before stowing it into his backpack as well. I have to. The former Boy Wonder states and Beast Boy rolls his eyes while crossing his arms over his chest. Dude, you got your butt kicked, it happens. Beast Boy reminds and Raven glances over to the Green Jester. Happens to some of us more than others. She notes and Beast Boy twitches, while giving the gray-skinned girl an annoyed look. Shaking his head after a moment, Beast Boy then looks back to Nightwing while waving slightly. Anyways, it doesn't mean you have to quit. Beast Boy states while Nightwing slings his backpack over his right shoulder. Yes. We will soon locate this Kataru, and then it will be you who is kicking the butt. Starfire offered with a bright smile only for Nightwing to frown. I'm not quitting the team. Night stresses to the girl and the rest of his friends before sighing softly and looking to the side. But my fight with Kataru showed me how much I still have to learn about martial arts. Nightwing explains while flashes of his fight with the man late the night before pass before his mind's eye. No problem. I can help you train. Cyborg states while taking a quick martial arts stance. I got a new computer simulated fight sequence in the gym. Cyborg offers while taking several more poses, Nightwing merely walking past him. Or how about you and me spar, I am an Amazonian warrior after all. Donna offers and yet again Night passes her before sighing as he stops before his door. I've already trained with the best and apparently it wasn't enough. Night states simply before then turning around to face his team. There's only one person who can help me. Night tells them and Starfire walks up to their leader. You wish to learn from this true master of whom the villain spoke. Starfire questions of her friend with a curious tone, and Nightwing narrowed his eyes for a moment before exhaling. I'm not coming back until I find him. Nightwing states and Cyborg moves up beside of Starfire, and gives the spiky-haired teen an incredulous look. What? Aw, come on, man. How do you know this true master is even a good guy? How are you gonna find him? Do you even know where you're going? Cyborg demands while moving his arms around animatedly and Nightwing mentally rolls his eyes before answering. I'm not sure. Nightwing starts to say while Raven crosses her arms and sits down on Nightwing's bed. Sounds like a plan. Raven notes sarcastically and gets a look from Night before he sighs and inwardly admits she has a point, but this is something he feels he must do. According to legend, the true master lives in the mountains on the other side of the world and can be found only by the most serious of students. Nightwing explains with a serious tone, only for Beast Boy to wave a hand to get his attention. I'm in. Beast Boy states with a grin, getting snickers from Kid Flash and an eye roll from Donna. When do we leave? What should I pack? Will I need shots? This is gonna be so cool. Beast Boy says with a grin, only to blink as Nightwing turns around and walks out of the room. I have to go alone. The Boy Wonder states flatly while the door to his room seals shut, Cyborg exhaling and scratching his head. In the immortal words of Red X, that guy takes himself way too seriously. Cyborg notes, instantly getting nods of agreement from the rest of the team, while Raven suppresses a smirk before crossing her legs. Now we're down 2 members until Nightwing returns, and Kid Flash fully heals from his injury. Raven notes and Cyborg frowns deeply while crossing his arms over his chest. Hey, you giving me daily treatments to help fix my leg? Kid Flash reminds the girl, and Raven sighs for a moment before rubbing her temples. My treatments will help you heal, but it'll still take at least a month for your knee to be back to full strength. And even then you might want to be careful with it. Raven replies, Kid Flash shrugging his shoulders, while Cyborg starts to drum his metallic fingers on his right bicep. Yeah, that is problem. Not to mention with Slade out there, we really need all the help we can get around here. Not Night running off for some training on the other side of the damn planet. Cyborg grumbles out and walks out of the room as well, Donna and Kid Flash following after him. Looking to one another for a moment, Starfire, Raven, and Beast Boy then followed after their temporary leader and the rest of the team into the ops center. Got any ideas, dude? Beast Boy suddenly questions while Cyborg sits down before a computer terminal and starts to look up honorary titans. Maybe we can call in a few honorary titans until Night gets back and Kid Flash heals up, that way we won't be down any members while Slade's out there. There's strength in numbers after all. Cyborg replies while looking around on the computer only for Raven to float down next to him, hands on her hips. Why are we calling in someone from out of town when we all know someone who can literally cut Slade into pieces who's here in Jump City? Raven asked flatly, and Cyborg blinked for a moment before a look of realization crossed his features. Right, Naruto? He said, and Beast Boy decided to add something to the equation. He has those powers of his and he's a killer ninja. Beast Boy offered, and Donna clicked her tongue for a moment before adding something as well. He's proven he can match, if not best, Nightwing in both armed and unarmed combat. She supplied thoughtfully, and Kid Flash grinned for a moment. He's as fast as I am when he wants to be. Kid Flash noted while Starfire smiled and folded her hands together. And he truly wishes to protect friend Raven. Starfire noted with a smile, Cyborg rubbing his chin for a moment before nodding his head. Alright, I'll bite, but how exactly do we gonna get Nar to agree to this? In case any of y'all have forgotten, even though he's obviously done so before now, he really doesn't like playing the hero. Cyborg reminds before his human eye takes a hint of realization before rubbing his chin thoughtfully and leaning back in his seat. Dude, Nar used to be a ninja, just hire him, and he'd help. Beast Boy reminds, and Cyborg rolls his human eye before giving the green-furred teen an annoyed look. Oh, and where the hell do you expect us to get the money to hire Nar? He's probably more expensive than all of Tartarus combined. Cyborg noted with a grumble, and Beast Boy frowned in thought before they all stopped when someone cleared his throat. Looking to the door to ops, the Titans blinked when they saw the Flash himself leaning into the doorframe with a smirk. Hey Titans. Just came by to tell Raven that Dr. Fate wants to talk to her. But what's all this about needing money? Flash questioned before zipping over to Bard and frowning when he saw him needing a crutch and cast over his knee. Damn, I see Deathstroke hasn't changed much, still an evil bastard. Flash noted, and Raven raised a brow before her eyes suddenly flared. Wait, the jail, you were aware of Slade the whole time? Raven demanded and saw Flash grimace before grinning nervously. Maybe. He replied, and Cyborg crossed his arms over his chest. And y'all didn't do anything about him, why? Cyborg questioned in a strained tone, and Flash rubbed the back of his neck. That's about that, though I think it has something to do with staying out of you guys' way or something like that. The Flash admitted, and Cyborg mumbled something under his breath, while the Flash heard a noise from his earbud. Yeah. He replies while placing a hand to his ear, and Beast Boy looks over to Cyborg. Dude, why don't we have really small communicators like that? The green teen questions and gets an annoyed glare from Cyborg as his answer. Right, wait, you what? Flash questioned only to step back as 3 flashes of light appeared in the center of the room. Batman was one of them, followed by Dr. Fate, and finally, a man with dark red hair with a white streak in it, a brown jacket with a black sweater, brown slacks, black shoes, pale skin, and cold dark eyes. Yo, man. Doc Fate. Mr. Blood. Flash offers and gets a nod of acknowledgement from Dr. Fate, before he walks over to Raven, the red-haired man crossing his arms behind his back as he follows. I finished analyzing that hair I found at the murder scene earlier, Flash. Batman says while walking over to the computer Cyborg was sitting at and gives him a look, Cyborg getting up quickly and allowing Batman to sit down. I found a match in the databanks. Batman continued before a picture of Ravager appeared on the Titan's screen. The Ravager? Cyborg questions while scratching his head, and Batman nods before crossing his arms. Also known as Deathstroke's daughter, she's an assassin who was trained by Deathstroke himself. After his death she took up his business. Now it looks like she's killing off members of the Order of Scath for rings of Azar. Batman supplies while Raven's eyes widen before a scowl crosses her features. What would she or Slade need with several rings of Azar? One is enough to ward off even my more dangerous attacks, well, if they can somehow get it near me at least. Raven noted mostly to herself, and Dr. Fate decided to answer for Batman. We're not sure, but for the moment we clearly need to be on high alert. Whatever it is that Deathstroke has planned, I somehow doubt it's in the interests of our enemy. Dr. Fate replies while deciding to omit Trigon's name for Raven's sake, and then looks over to said girl. Now then, Miss Raven, we should adjourn and speak of any new findings we might have made. Dr. Fate insists, and the violet-haired girl slowly nods her head in agreement. Jason, you come as well. I wish to know what you've found, and you are more well-versed in this particular area of the supernatural. Dr. Fate notes and Jason smirks slightly before turning stone serious as he, Dr. Fate, and Raven walk out of ops. Frowning while working on the computer, Batman then turns his head over to Cyborg with a thin frown. Now then, hiring anyone to take over for Nightwing will be unnecessary. The JLU was called in to investigate a murder case. We'll watch Jump City until the case is solved. The rest of you should rest, especially since Kid Flash is injured and Raven is Slade's primary target. Batman states and Cyborg looks like he wants to argue, only for the Flash to move over to his side, one arm over the Titanium Teen's shoulders. Trust me, Cyborg, you really don't want to argue with bats. The Flash warns while Cyborg looks to the red-clothed speedster before reluctantly nodding his head. He was well aware of the few who did argue with Batman ending up looking like fools. Dude, if the JLU are going to be in charge, what are we going to do? Beast Boy questions of Cyborg and the Metal Man frown in thought while walking out of ops. Blinking, Beast Boy follows after Cyborg walking behind the Titanium Teen silently waiting for his answer. Cyborg himself considers their options. Training was an option, but Kid Flash was out of commission and couldn't join in to build teamwork. Man, I don't know, this whole thing is really starting to get crazy. Cyborg replies with a shrug of his shoulders, Beast Boy scratching his head as he follows behind his metal-plated friend. However, a second later an idea comes to Beast Boy's mind, and he grins up at his titanium friend. So if we're not doing anything, can I go visit my girlfriend? Beast Boy asks with a raised brow in Cyborg's direction, the Titanium Teen giving his friend a look before smirking slightly. Alright man, why don't you just call her Kitten for once? Cyborg questioned with an amused look on his face, while Beast Boy gaped at Cyborg. What? I may not be Knight, but I do have an IQ of 210, as well as a cybernetic brain, and besides all that I read your journal. Cyborg explained with a smirk before shrugging while Beast Boy stared at him, then blinked incredulously. Dude, you're not supposed to read my stuff and invade my privacy like that, Cyborg. Beast Boy exclaimed and Cyborg shrugged his shoulders. And you invading Raven's privacy to invade her room several times now is any different how? Cyborg questioned of the green-furred teen flatly, Beast Boy blinking before giving a nervous grin. Alright but I've never read Ray's diary or anything. The green-furred teen reminds and Cyborg nods his head slowly. Only cause she doesn't have one. He replies with a frown and Beast Boy sputters while walking with his friend. Anyways besides all that, I'm fine with you going out to see Kitten. I have no beef with her really, that's all Star and Knight, they really know how to hold a grudge. Cyborg said with a shake of his head before crossing his arms over his chest and giving a look to his green friend. So get going before I change my mind. Cyborg orders, causing Beast Boy to blink for a second before grinning widely and zipping off, and leaving Cyborg to shake his head with a smirk as he goes. Tartarus HQ. Danielle Phantom Masters was not having a good day. First of all, her body's recent quirks had reached their zenith, and she was starting to get a glimpse of her true ghostly self for the first time. Her hair is still white and her ponytail made of white fire. Her skin, however, is the same shade of gray as Raven, Jinx, or Ember the Rocker Ghost. Her eyes have dark rings around them with a black tear-like curl from her right eye. Her lips have turned a green color as if she was wearing lipstick. And finally, eyes now glowed with a ghostly green light, however her pupils have turned red. I now officially hate my life. Donnie decided, wearing a simple medical gown, since all her clothes were too small for her larger frame. Another annoyance for her is that her body has started to act oddly. She would phase into intangibility, turn invisible, and even start changing shapes at random times. It was only thanks to Gizmo ghost-proofing the infirmary that she hadn't somehow destroyed herself. The worst part being that currently she has a hole in her chest like a hollow, from that weird Bleach anime she watched with Kid Wicked once. And how exactly do you hate your life now any more than when you hated it the other day? Gizmo demanded of the girl while poking a stick through the hole in the middle of her torso with a smirk, Donnie scowling as he did so. Stop that half pint. It's not fucking funny. The gosling girl exclaimed furiously, her hair rising slightly and Gizmo throwing the stick away and whistling to himself innocently. Man, could you please stop antagonizing her? It's hard enough to study her biology without her being pissed off. Seymour says with a shake of his head, Gizmo smirking, while Donnie twitched lightly before turning her head a full 360 degrees to glare at the now gaping Cyclops. Don't talk about me like I'm some kind of damn lab rat, One Eye. The girl shouted while at the side, Dwayla snickered into one hand, even while videotaping the event, mostly because some people had wanted to see the equivalent to ghost puberty, and were willing to pay top dollar for it. But also because she just loved to do random ass things like this. Sorry Donnie, but it's kind of hard not to with you being another species and all. Seymour reminds and Donnie gives the boy a glare, a low rumbling growl reverberating from deep in her throat. Seymour, shut your trap before she decides to possess you and make you think you're a pretty schoolgirl. Gizmo warns, and the Cyclops gulps upon seeing a sinister-looking smirk cross Donnie's features. Why did Giz have to give her that idea? Seymour wondered to himself while Donnie then looked around and a frown crossed her features. Where's Sensei? She asked Gizmo, and the tiny terror frowned while crossing his arms over his chest. Same place he's been since he fought with Slade. Gizmo replies and Donnie frowns to herself while drumming her fingers on the bed. You mean in his room staring at that S-shaped symbol? Donnie questions with a raised brow and Gizmo nods his head silently. Geez, I never thought I'd see the day Sensei would take something so seriously. Donnie admits with a worried look crossing her features as she looks back to Gizmo. Boy, his girlfriend is involved, what do you expect? Gizmo reminds and Donnie nods her head, knowing that when Raven was in trouble, her sensei would usually go a little nuts. Said boy is currently sitting in his room and typing on his computer, searching for the shaped symbol on the net. Kar-chan said it's called the Mark of Scath, it's got to have some kind of meaning to it. The blonde thinks to himself while checking several links, only to scowl when none of them tell him anything he didn't already know. Oi, what I need is Kar-chan's books, and she's got to know more than she's telling. The blonde thinks to himself while crossing his arms over his chest, then looked to the side as someone knocked on his door. Come on in. He allows while glaring to his side, narrowing his eyes onto the shaped symbol dangerously. As he does, Jinx enters into his room, poking her head in first before walking inside and staring at him silently. Temp, you do realize that staring at that isn't going to help, right? Jinx questions while walking over to her friend and Naruto, silently nods his head, a frown across his features. Then why are you glaring at it like that? Urza questions while scratching her head with a confused look on her face. Because I really don't like it. Not only did that Slade freak become immortal after getting it burned onto his forehead, the Kar-chan got a series of fucking runes practically seared onto her body with it also on her forehead. The blonde replies with a deep scowl across his face and Jinx's eyes before rubbing her temples, and then sits down on his bed. It's known as the Mark of Scath, it's used by the Order of Scath as their symbol. Jinx states and Naruto blinked before turning to look at her with a raised brow. Called 101 at the hive. She states with a smirk, and Naruto shakes his head for a moment before crossing his arms. Got anything else on them? Naruto questions and Jinx nods her head and sighs. The Order of Scath is also known as the Church of Blood, to which our old headmaster Brother Blood was the leader. However, since he's in prison in Steel City, he's been unable to do anything with them. The Order worships a demonic entity known as Scath. His true name is Trigon the Terrible, an extra-dimensional demon who's known for his cruelty and power. The girl replied while a deep scowl crossed Naruto's features, as several things finally started to make sense. So this has to do with Kar-chan's old man, and thereby the prophecy of her birth. Naruto mused to himself while leaning back in his seat, Jinx blinking in confusion at that last tidbit of information. Prophecy? Jinx questions of Naruto and he frowns while remaining silent. Sighing as she realizes that Naruto won't be telling her anything, Jinx then leaned into one fist while staring at the blonde. So, what now? Jinx asks and Naruto crosses his arms, closes his eyes, and leans back in his seat for a moment. Donnie's still sick so I can't train her in using the Samurai Saber techniques. I learned Giz is probably working on yet another new version of my suit. Kid Wicket went to visit his cousin Cheryl, Heather Mason in Silent Hill, for some reason. The blonde inwardly mused while wondering why Kid had to visit his cousin. The only thing he knew was that Kid got a letter about his uncle dying, and he'd left before even asking if he could. Not that it matters. Kid does deserve a vacation. He's the only guy on this team I can count on in stealth. Though I gotta admit he is a little weird. The blonde mused to himself while drumming his fingers on his left bicep. Will is out of her mind, and I really don't want to spend too much time with her. Blackfire is out and about right now. I've really got to wonder where she goes when she's not here at HQ meh. So long as she isn't getting arrested it doesn't matter. Seymour is too fascinated by Donnie to do anything. Private is too military to relax. Billy is well he's Billy. And Mammoth is out gorging himself again. Man, we need work. Everyone is becoming way too lax. The blonde couldn't help but think to himself while tapping one foot on the ground. I wonder what Kar-chan is up to. But I do really need to spend more time with my team. Then again most of them are off doing their own things. I guess I could do something with Jinx. Let's see what to do. The blonde continued to think to himself, while Jinx watched him from his bed with a bored look on her face. No movies I want to see, no reason to go out to eat, nothing to steal. Training. Maybe, but what kind of training could we do? Wait, survival training maybe. Yeah, and Kar-chan needs some as well. Besides that she did seem to like the forest the other day. Naruto thought to himself as a smirk slowly crossed over his face. Hey Jinx, did they teach you wilderness survival in the hive? Naruto questions with a raised brow and gets a look from Jinx as his response. In the year you were there, did you ever see a class like that? She asked him flatly and Naruto shrugged his shoulders as his response. Exactly. Neither the headmistress nor Brother Blood saw any reason to give us a course that is taught by most scouts. Jinx explains, and Naruto raised a brow before rolling his eyes with a smirk across his lips. Would you want to know, temp? Jinx then questioned, and Naruto grinned towards her for a moment. How would you like to go with me, and possibly Kara-chan, into the forest for a little survival training then? Naruto questioned of the rosette, and Jinx mentally grimaced while considering her options. On one hand, she really did want to spend more time with Naruto, especially since they barely did anymore. But on the other, she didn't like the idea of hanging around the couple in the middle of the forest. However, she and Raven had called a truce, of sorts, so maybe they could be in one another's presence for that time, without being at one another's throats. Besides, Naruto would be too close for either of them to attack the other without looking foolish. Alright, I'll be civil, but you still have to convince Raven it's a good idea to spend a few days in the woods alone with you and me. Jinx reminds with a frown on her face, and Naruto nodded his head while stretching his arms out. Yeah, I know, but that shouldn't take too long. The blonde replies while getting up and then made his way to his door. By the way, Jinx, you really should stop sitting on my bed, and why are you wearing black again today? Naruto questioned with an amused look on his face as he ducked out of the room, leaving Jinx to blink before growling as she saw his mirror was still in the same spot it had been the last time he'd done that. Why the hell does he even have that there anyways? The rosette demanded loudly before falling back on the bed with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. Sighing, deciding to pack up for the trip, Jinx then got up and glared at the mirror for a moment. If I wasn't sure that my powers would go nuts for 7 years, I'd so smash you. She told the mirror before walking out of the room and making her way to her own to pack up. Titan's Tower. Raven sits in a dark conference room that had seen very little use over the years, mainly because of the fact none of the other Titans were really all that official, and even inductions came at a sedate pace. We really need to figure out some better use for most of the rooms in the tower, half of them just collect dust. The violet-eyed girl thought to herself while shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Across from her is Dr. Fate, nearby, and with his eyes closed and fingers laced together is Jason Blood. Please Raven, try and calm down, this isn't an interrogation. Dr. Fate reminds, and the girl glances over towards Jason Blood for a moment before shifting uncomfortably once more. While not well known, Jason was an expert in demons, their magic, rituals, and all other things dealing with them. In fact, much like Naruto himself, Jason even has a demon sealed inside of himself. However, this was done by Merlin himself. It was a punishment from the wizard onto the man, back when Jason betrayed the kingdom of Camelot to Morgan Laffey. I believe she is slightly uncomfortable because of my presence, not because of fear. Jason suddenly states while opening a sharp dark eye, and gazing over to the violet-eyed girl, causing her to shiver once more. Upon seeing this, Dr. Fate mentally sighed. He knew Jason was intimidating, but he'd never thought Raven of all people would be affected by the man. Then again, he was as stoic as Batman himself, and Raven seemed to be coming out of her shell, thanks to her boyfriend. Ah, I see, but do not fret, Raven. Jason is only here because he is the only one I felt could help us with this situation. Dr. Fate tries to placate, but Raven still looks to the scarlet-haired man uncomfortably. Perhaps it's more Etrigan she's uncomfortable with, and not Jason himself. Dr. Fate wondered to himself before shaking his head slightly and crossing his arms. Jason, what have you discovered? Dr. Fate then questions of the scarlet-haired man, and he exhales a breath with a deep frown on his face. The seals and runes Batman and Flash, located in the basement of the first member of the Order of Scath, were indeed necromantic runes. However, rather than resurrecting them, the runes would transfer the life force of the deceased members to an as-of-yet unknown location. As such, it is possible any suicides in the area are also members of the Order. Jason replies, and Raven blinks before frowning for a moment and thinking over her own exceptional knowledge of magic. If these runes transfer life force, then the only purpose they serve is to help open the portal to Trigun's realm. They're primarily dark souls, and the gem of evil would be all that would be needed to open the door and allow him entry into our world. Raven muses aloud, and a frown crosses Jason's features. That is most troubling news. This warrants further investigation, I'm afraid. Dr. Fate muses aloud while Jason nods his head silently, then looks over to Raven for a moment. I hear you have a collection of books on demonic runes and ritualistic magic, correct, from your homeworld of Azeroth, correct? Jason asks flatly, and Raven blinks for a moment before slowly nodding her head. Good, I would like to see them if it is not too much trouble. Jason requests of the girl, and Raven nods her head slowly, giving her accent to the scarlet-haired man. Excellent. That should be all I'll need. The JLU have requested that I remain in Jump City for the time being and continue my research. Jason then states, and Raven looks over to Dr. Fate for an explanation. Myself and several members of the League felt that only Jason could do this without a bias. As you well know, Zatanna and others in the League believe we should outright destroy you to prevent the apocalypse from coming to pass. Dr. Fate reminds, and Raven visibly grimaces before rubbing her arms. Zoriel actually offered to help protect you, however, something of a surprise considering his heritage. Jason suddenly offered and saw Raven flinch. The idea of being remotely close to an actual angel from heaven, given her demonic heritage, not really helping calm her down. I don't think that would be such a good idea. If my anger got out of control around him, I'd most likely attack to kill without question. Raven replied, and Dr. Fate nodded his head in agreement. The disputes between heaven and hell were the things of legends after all. Very well, but for the moment I feel you need to rest. The JLU shall be taking charge of Jump City until further notice. Your JCPD called us when several murders took place in town after they felt it best to have people more experienced with psychotic and murderous films. No offense meant to you and the Titans, of course. Dr. Fate said while trying not to sound too arrogant, and Raven merely shrugged her shoulders. I don't have a problem with you or the JLU being in town. Nightwing is the one who has an inferiority complex, at least when he's around Batman. The girl replies, and Dr. Fate allows an amused chuckle to echo out, Jason merely smirking as everyone was well aware of Nightwing and his problems with the Dark Knight. Indeed, and it seems your boyfriend is here and entertaining the Flash with a race downstairs. Dr. Fate starts then finishes while placing a hand to the side of his helmeted head, Raven groaning lightly before looking over to Jason. Go and see what he wants, you can show me to your books afterwards. Jason states while waving her away, Raven nodding even as she forms a shadow, then reaches up and pulls her away, leaving Jason alone with Dr. Fate. So then, what do you make of her, Jason? Dr. Fate then questions of his current partner while standing up, and the stoic man sighs softly. Bit quiet, has great wisdom even for one so young, seems to have a problem making friends or expressing herself for obvious reasons, and needs to learn a few things about controlling her demonic heritage. He notes with a slight frown, and Dr. Fate nods his head in agreement with the scarlet-haired man. But at least more level-headed than most half-demons I know. Jason then finishes and Dr. Fate chuckles to himself as he leaves the room to make his way to Ops. Below. Naruto really had to wonder how he got into this situation. He come to Titan's tower to talk to Raven, only for the Flash to meet him at the door. He said something about Raven talking to Dr. Fate, and a guy called Jason Blood, and then asked how fast he was. After that was kind of a blur, and then he suddenly finds himself racing the Flash around Titan's tower. Come on, you gotta keep up, Blondie. The older man, dressed primarily in red and yellow, cried while Naruto slid to a halt. Boy, and I thought I was fast, this guy is running circles around me. The blonde muses to himself, not acknowledging the smirk across his face as he narrows his eyes on the Flash. Pushing chakra down into his legs, Naruto then launched himself forward and directly at the Flash. Said red-clothed man quickly dodging to the side, but Naruto twisted around and slapped a hand to his back. As he does, Naruto channels his chakra to his hand, pressing it down into the cloth that the Flash is wearing, and staining it in the shape of a seal. Hahaha, now the fun really begins. The blonde thinks to himself while the Flash sips away once more. Smirking lightly, the blonde then uses his Ancient Jutsu and vanishes in a yellow flash, appearing behind the Flash and bringing his foot down on top of him from behind. However, the Flash then zipped off with a grin, running across the water of the lake, only for Naruto to appear before him and kick him in the face. Skidding back, the Flash flips back to his feet with a surprised look before narrowing his eyes as Naruto lands on the water, a smirk on his face as he stands on top of it. Man, the ninja from your world learned some really wild things, don't they? The Flash questions, Naruto shrugging his shoulders with a smirk as he does so. What can I say, we've had several hundred years to figure out how to do even the most wild of things with chakra. Naruto replies and the Flash nods his head, only for both to turn when Raven materializes with a frown on her face. Mind telling me what you're doing here, Naruto? Raven questions flatly and the said blonde grins nervously while rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry Kar-chan, but Red here wanted to see how fast I am. Naruto says while motioning to the Flash, said hero blinking before shrugging his shoulders. Yeah, and I've got to admit he's got some good speed on him, not quite in my league, but still. The Flash muses aloud and gets a look from Naruto, only for the blonde to turn back to Raven when she clears her throat. So exactly what are you doing here anyways, Naruto? Raven questions of the blonde flatly while floating out over the water to him, Naruto blinking for a moment before snapping his fingers. Right. I came to ask if you wanted to come with me and a friend out on a trip to the forest for some light survival training. Naruto replies and Raven raises a brow before frowning for a moment. There was only two people Naruto would bring with him other than her. First was of course his current apprentice Donnie, and the other was Jinx, his best friend. Please tell me you're talking about Donnie. Raven asked the blonde-haired teen, and Naruto shook his head. Ugh, do we have to bring her? Raven asked while meaning Jinx, since they couldn't name her in front of a hero like the Flash. I kind of need to spend more time with my friends too, Kar-chan, but with Donnie sick and being watched by several of them, Kid off to visit his cousin, and well you know how the others are. Naruto replies and Raven nods her head in agreement, well aware of how Billy, Private, Dwayla, and even Blackfire were. But do I really want to go out into a forest with Naruto for survival training? Especially with Jinx around. Raven wondered to herself while crossing her arms over her chest and frowning lightly. Truthfully, her and Jinx did have a truce of sorts running, but having a truce to not antagonize one another, and actively liking one another were two different things. Sure, she could sympathize with Jinx in her lack of control over her powers, and even causing mass damage and even death if she lost control. But that didn't mean that she wanted to spend any long periods of time with the reset. On the other hand, however, she really didn't want Jinx spending extended periods of time alone with Naruto. While she knew Naruto would cut off an arm before cheating on her, having felt those pains himself, she couldn't help the feeling of jealousy she got, and wondered why nothing ever blew up when she felt jealous. Oh wait, she usually attacked whatever made her jealous, shaking off that thought. Raven thought over her options before letting out a soft sigh. Fine, how long till we leave? Raven asks flatly, and Naruto takes a moment to consider that. I'll come by and get you in 20 minutes. How's that? The blonde-haired teen asks, and Raven nods her assent, the blonde grinning as she does. Cool, and before I forget, pack light, and I'll see you then, Card-chan. The blonde then states with a smile while performing a shunshin and vanishing in a swirl of wind, literally creating a miniature tornado that vanished as soon as he was gone. That was new. Raven noted while the Flash wondered how the ninja from Naruto's world could do all those neat tricks. Especially running on water without having to be as fast as me, that would be really useful. The man couldn't help but think to himself while remembering a few times he'd accidentally fallen underwater and had some minor trouble getting back to his feet from sinking too fast. Tartarus HQ. Donnie sighed while walking around the HQ. Well, not exactly better, she was more than well enough to where she didn't have to stay in bed all day. That, and bed sores really hurt. Rubbing her sore neck, Donnie wandered around, then looked to her chest and sighed happily. Thank you, Kami-sama, for that stupid hole being gone. The girl thought to herself before stopping and blinked. Kami-sama. Where did that come from? She wondered before rubbing her temples and inwardly thinking she spends way too much time around her sensei to be healthy. At least it's better than acting like Dwell. She admitted to herself, while her partner in crime and her got along. It was clearly a relationship similar to that of Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, in that Donnie could stand and work with Dwella, and is even her friend at times. Only she got on her nerves very, very easily. Stopping at a bathroom, Donnie then walked inside and checked her features, breathing a relieved sigh to see her pupils had changed back to being black, rather than the menacing blood red they had been before. Well, at least I don't have pointed ears like my dad. Donnie inwardly grumbled while referring to Vlad Master's Plasmius, rather than Danny Fenton Phantom for once. Spotting the black tear-shaped mark from her right eye did however cause her brow to raise, as she traced a finger along its length. Weird, it's just like one of Ember's marks. Donnie noted to herself, referring to one of her many ghostly friends in the ghost zone, as unlike her bio dad Danny, she didn't shove every ghost she saw into a cramped little thermos. Now what did she say those meant again? Come on, I know it was important, oh right. Ember said a ghost with tear-shaped marks usually experienced something so bad that it stained them in that shape. Ember's birth as a ghost is what caused her markings to appear, so maybe something about mine did as well. Donnie thought in recollection before shaking her head and turning around, crossing her arms over her now noticeably expanded bust. I'm a teenager, that comes with it, and I'm really not complaining. The girl muses to herself, glad for one thing that since her biology was mostly ghostly in nature, she didn't have the problem of a menstrual cycle. That tidbit had garnered her more than a little animosity from some of the other girls in Tartarus, but it wasn't her fault she was 2/3 ghost now, was it? The only drawback she saw was that she did have to deal with the whole rapid aging thing once every so often, like what was currently happening to her, which in and of itself was really not fun. Well, take the good with the bad. Donnie mused before stopping outside of Gizmo's workshop, and then turned her head to look inside. Inside she saw Gizmo writing something on a notepad while working on something near the back of the room. What the hell is that? The gosling girl wondered before turning invisible and intangible and moving through the wall and into the room to see what was going on. However, she almost wished she hadn't when she saw the almost disturbing machine Gizmo was now working on. It was pure ivory white in color and clearly hollowed out like a helmet, with two soulless black eyes with a black X over both of the eyes that formed under them like tear marks. Its head was designed like a skull with sharp jagged teeth. It had a long series of spinal plates falling from the base of its skull, while two strange gauntlet-like apparatus were hanging beside the strange head. The gauntlets topped off with more of the spinal plates, which were all connected to a series of wires which lead over to a computer terminal at the side. Alright now, let's see inferred on. Gizmo suddenly exclaimed while at the computer and pressed a button, the eyes of the helmet flaring to life to turn a blood red in color. The X over the eyes turning a slightly darker scarlet color, while the edges of the teeth also gave an insidious glow that silhouetted the white skull's teeth. Shivering despite herself, Donnie continued to watch as Gizmo then took hold of a joystick and started to move it around, her eyes widening as the skull started to move around. Yeah, good mobility, but still needs a few tweaks. Response time is also a little laggy. Gizmo noted to himself while jotting something down on his notepad, and then checked the screen at his side, which was showing him an inferred version of the room. Yeah, that looks good now for the next setting. Gizmo mused while turning the inferred of the mask's vision settings off and turned on night vision, the eyes turning a ghostly neon green color as he did so. The change is still too lagging, need to figure out a way to speed it up. Gizmo noted to himself with a frown while jotting something down at his side, and then checked the screen. Otherwise, night vision is more than ready to go. The tiny terror exclaims while Donnie slowly floats upwards on the off chance Gizmo might activate an ultraviolet setting, which would be able to see her. Alright, next up, ultraviolet setting. Gizmo says with a nod of his head, and Donnie inwardly thanks herself for moving when she had the chance, and looking down as the tiny terror made a few more notes. Alright, vision settings are good. Now for the other systems. Gizmo says while pressing a few switches and Donnie's eyes whitened as the skull suddenly moved its jaws. Kami-sama. She thought to herself with white eyes as a low synthetic moan-groan sound echoed out of the skull's open jaws. That is the single most disturbing thing I have ever seen/heard. The girl thought to herself while staring at the skull as its jaw rose up and down, a metallic grate of some kind on the inside of the sharp teeth. Yeah, sounds okay, but now for a better test. Gizmo says to himself while walking over to the helmet and reached into it from the hollowed-out portion on the underside of it. Feeling around, he then pulled a small microphone out and held it towards his lips with a grin. My name is X, Red X. The tiny terror says into the mic, causing a deep synthetic voice to come out of the skull with its jaws moving as well, masking Gizmo's voice with its own, and causing a shiver to run the length of Donnie's spine. Damn, and I thought the moan/groan it made was creepy. Donnie thought to herself while Gizmo replaced the mic into the strange skull-like helm. Yeah, sounds good, now let's check out the rebreather. He says to himself while prying open the jaws of the helm, and started checking the strange grate-like device on the inside of it. Okay, I've seen enough, I am so out of here. The Gosling girl thinks to herself while flying out of Gizmo's workshop lab, and shivers for a moment when she's out of earshot of the tiny terror. If that is the incomplete version of Sensei's new suit, I really don't want to know what it'll look like when it's finally finished. It's creepy to me, and I'm 2/3 ghost. The Gosling girl grumbles to herself only to yelp loudly as her powers curl themselves, causing her to fall to the ground flat on her face. Twitching for a moment, the Gosling girl then looked up with her eyes narrowed and burning a bright crimson red. I hate ecto-puberty. She shouts loudly while growling low in her throat, Naruto passing her while whistling to himself as she does. Ignoring his student's plight, mostly because Gizmo had told her not to wander off, and heading back to his room, Naruto saw Jinx with a backpack sitting beside his door. So, what's the word, temp? Jinx questions with a raised brow, her head resting against her open palms as she stared up at him dully for a moment. Kar-chan agreed, so I'm getting my stuff ready, then going to get her in about a little bit, so get ready. We'll meet back up out front and then head to the forest on the outskirts of town. Naruto replies while walking into his room, Jinx nodding her head with a sigh, while also wondering what survival training with someone like Naruto was going to be like. Jump City. Beast Boy and Kitten were walking through the park near the center of town, while Beast Boy explained what was happening in the tower. Yeah, so now we have Batman, The Flash, Dr. Fate, and Jason Blood. I kind of wish Superman were around just so I could meet him, or maybe even Vixen, since we have similar abilities. Beast Boy continued while walking beside of Kitten, the blonde-haired girl raising a brow at that last tidbit. Should I start to feel jealous of Vixen, Beastie? Kitten asked the green-furred teen with a raised brow, and Beast Boy nearly yelped in alarm. No? Of course not. It's just she can use all the powers of animals like I can, only without shape-shifting as well. Beast Boy says quickly with white eyes, Kitten snickering into one hand as he does so. She was somewhat aware that her father threatened him not to break her heart, but honestly, didn't all fathers make that threat? But then again, with Killer Moth, a villain from Gotham no less, that was more than just a threat. Chill Beastie, I was only kidding. Kitten finally said, allowing the green-furred teen to relax and exhale a quick breath. Dude, please don't scare me like that, I think I almost had a heart attack. Beast Boy mumbles under his breath while Kitten rolls her eyes for a moment, then decides it's about time to change the subject back to what she had originally been listening to. So anyways, the JLU are coming in and stealing you guys' work from you or what? She asked him curiously, half to tease him about not working, and half to find out if it was true, so she could hold off on any excursions as Pink X. While she kept a lower profile than the usual villains, she had continued her escapades as the masked thief. Nah, they're just keeping an eye on the place till night gets back, I think. But then they also have a case in town with some recent murders or something. Beast Boy replies with a wave of his hand, believing she was asking so she could tell her father to keep a lower than normal profile. Hey, it's not like Killer Moth did anything truly villainous recently. In fact, he hadn't heard from him since the plant invasion. Oh yeah, and like I said before, Batman's in town. Beast Boy added as an afterthought, causing Kitten to grimace for a moment. Yikes, now he's definitely someone from Gotham I never wanted to see again. Though the last time I saw him I was still just a little girl. Kitten said aloud, and Beast Boy blinked before his head snapped over to Kitten. Dude, you actually met Batman. Like, why didn't you ever tell me about that before? Beast Boy questioned, and Kitten rubbed her temples for a moment as she remembered how they had met back when she was still little. Shaking her head, Kitten walked over to the side and sat down on a bench. Beast Boy following closely behind her and looking to her expectantly. It's more of a sort of I met him. It was back when Daddy first escaped from Gotham. Kitten admits and sees the eager look that's formed on Beast Boy's face. Well, he did tell me his origin, so I guess it's only fair. Kitten mused to herself before taking a breath and leaning back on the bench. I've told you how my mom abandoned me, right? Kitten questioned, and Beast Boy slowly nodded his head with a grimace. Well, I think I was about 5 years old at the time. Dad was in Arkham after the accident that turned him into a Mothman, and I started to develop my clearly inhuman traits around that time. Kitten began while letting out a sigh and crossed her arms over her chest. Mom didn't even leave a name for me when she dropped me off, so they called me Kitten, a name I liked, and the orphanage decided to let my surname be that of whomever adopted me. Kitten continued, and Beast Boy had to wonder how her mother could have been such a royal bitch. So anyways, Mom sends Dad a letter about what she did and he goes ballistic. Apparently Dad never knew he had any kids, and really didn't like that I was in an orphanage in Gotham of all places. Kitten starts to explain to the green-furred teen, only for Beast Boy to stop her where she was. Whoa, wait, your parents weren't married? Beast Boy questions of the blonde-haired girl with a shocked expression, and Kitten snorts. Obviously Beastie isn't aware that not every family is like they are on TV. Kitten muses to herself for a moment before shaking her head and answering the green-furred teen. My dad married. Not likely even before the Mothman thing, Beastie. Kitten explained with a frown, having long forgotten the woman, but knew her type fairly well. Anyways, Daddy literally tore his way out of Arkham. I think he even stuck some random and unlucky guard to the roof and left him to die. Kitten started only to trail off, Beast Boy looking at her, clearly more green than usual. Anyways, he then tore his way through Gotham, hitting every orphanage he could find in search for me. Kitten continued when Beast Boy interrupted her once more. Dude, how do you know which kid was going to be his? Beast Boy questioned, and Kitten rolled her eyes and gave him a look. You see, Mom told him quite clearly I wasn't normal, and in Dad's eyes, that meant I had to physically look strange. He also asked about Mom, and when a man who can bite clean through metal, bend steel with his bare hands, and stick you to a roof to die, asks you something, you going to answer him. Thus, finding someone like me back then was easy. This was before the metahuman problems started. I think I was actually one of the earliest metahuman. Kitten admits, and Beast Boy makes an O with his mouth before motioning for her to continue her story. Alright, so Daddy tore across Gotham looking for me, and of course, Batman got involved. Kitten continued before placing her elbows on her knees and propping her head on her hands. Daddy had to dodge the bat while looking for me. He used his friends in Gotham's underworld to hide, but never said he was looking for his daughter. Daddy was paranoid some of them would try to kidnap me or something like that anyways. Daddy eventually found the right orphanage and found me, and then took me out of the orphanage. Kitten continued as an amused smile crossed her lips as she remembered that day, week actually, quite clearly. Yeah, after that, I somehow convinced Daddy I wanted this and that. So, Daddy took me all over town to give me whatever I wanted. I think he was trying to compensate for never being there for me anyways, as he's taking me everywhere. Batman is still chasing us all over Gotham. And so Daddy decides he'll need to call some help to escape, thus called on all Skullface to help us escape. Kitten said with a grin, and Beast Boy blinked for a moment before giving Kitten a strange look. Skullface. Isn't that what Harley calls Red X? Beast Boy questions, and Kitten blinks and then mentally sighs to herself. Not X, Beastie, it was a mercenary called the Phantasm. I called him Skullface, because he wore an eerie skull mask with a hood and cloak, kind of like a Grim Reaper. Kitten explained, and Beast Boy made an O with his mouth, while Kitten inwardly snickered. Anyways, Skullface helped us get to the outskirts of town to escape when Batman shows up again. Daddy bolted with me, while the Phantasm held Batman off for us to get away. So I never met Batman, I did see him a lot though. Kitten finished while looking over to Beast Boy, said teen blinking for a moment before frowning. So why didn't he ever come looking for you guys? I mean, he's Chaz the Joker, Poison Ivy, and a lot of his other villains all over the planet, so why not come looking for your dad? Beast Boy wondered aloud while rubbing his chin in thought, and Kitten shrugged her shoulders. Who knows what Batman thinks? I wonder if even Nightwing knows what's going on in his head. Kitten says with a look, and Beast Boy nods his head in agreement, wondering if anyone did know what went on in Batman's head, quickly deciding that didn't matter. Beast Boy then crossed his arms behind his head and gave his girlfriend a look. So what do you want to do now? Beast Boy asks, and Kitten considers their options, since the JLU were taking over on the hero front. You see, we've got all the time in the world with the JLU doing your job for you guys. Let's just walk around and find something to do while we still can. Kitten says while grabbing Beast Boy's wrist, and then drags him behind her, as she makes her way out of the park with the green teen. Titan's Tower. Raven sighs while putting a few things into a backpack, much like Nightwing had earlier in the day. It wasn't that she didn't have more, it was more because Naruto said to pack light. Also, she could just use her powers to materialize nearly anything she needed later anyways. Looking to a clock to the side, she then slung one of the straps over her shoulder before frowning as she looked down at herself. Should I change my clothes? She wondered mostly to herself, then remembered she still hadn't gone shopping for anything besides that one outfit Starfire got for her. Note to self, go shopping sometime soon. She noted inwardly with a slight blush before sighing as she walked out of the room. Jason Blood was back in the seldom used conference room, having basically turned it into his research area, as he sifted through a plethora of books and tomes to find the answers to whatever was going on in Jump City lately. Walking down the hall, Raven twitched as Cyborg came from behind and walked beside of her. Going somewhere, eh? He asked her curiously, and Raven gave the titanium teen a slight look as he walked beside her. Me and Naruto are going on the equivalent of a camping trip, though he calls it survival exercises, so I'm guessing it's more like training to survive in the wild with how he can be. Raven replies with a shrug, Cyborg blinking for a moment before giving her a look. Hey, are you sure you should be going out with Slade out and about? Cyborg questioned of the younger girl and Raven mentally frowned before giving him an annoyed look. Naruto can clearly defend himself, and if need be, I'm sure he can hold off Slade long enough for me to call the rest of you. Raven replies and Cyborg blinks, only inwardly agreeing with her as he's seen what a pissed off Naruto could do. And, if his hunch was correct, he was certain Naruto had more tricks up his sleeves than anyone was actually aware. Come on Ray, Beast Boy, going out with his girl is one thing, but you're gonna be gone for who knows how long. What if we need to protect the city? I can't do it with just Kid Flash, Wonder Girl, Starfire, Beast Boy, and myself. Yeah, I could try, but you're one of the best members on the team. Cyborg exclaims while following behind Raven, who has a backpack on under her cloak, and an annoyed look on her face. And the JLU basically said to leave the hero work to them, thus that doesn't matter. Raven reminds, having already shown Jason Blood to her room, and by proxy her books, so he could continue his research. The man was clearly very well versed in magic, for obvious reasons, as he'd only found a few books in her collection that he didn't already have. I'm really going to have to ask about seeing his, I might find a few interesting ones. Raven muses to herself inwardly while continuing to walk through the halls of the tower and towards the elevator. Yeah, but... Cyborg tries to say only for Raven to give him an annoyed look. But nothing. I'm going out, Naruto will be with me so I'll be safe, and while I hate to admit it, I could really do with some more exercise. The violet-haired girl replies while continuing on her trek, looking down at herself with a frown as she went, and also leaving Cyborg standing alone in the hallway. Sighing as soon as he sees Raven enter the elevator, Cyborg then rubs his face with one hand, while turning around to head back to Ops. Beast Boy has a girl, Ray has not. Why is it that everyone in the tower is suddenly getting into a relationship? Cyborg wondered to himself while entering into Ops, stopping when he sees the Flash and Dr. Fate standing to either side of Batman, as he looks at a picture of the Ravager. Sitting on the sofa is Kid Flash, Donna, and Starfire, all three wondering what the older heroes had figured out. Sighing mentally, Cyborg walks to the side and sits on a smaller sofa to the side of the room, and looks over to the older heroes as they work. So it's really her then. The Flash muses and Batman nods his head silently. The international assassin and spy, District's daughter aka Rose Wilson, aka the Ravager. Powers include enhances strength, speed, agility, and intelligence. She's our prime suspect and most likely the culprit since the silver hair I found on the scene matches her own. I'll know for sure once I get a DNA match done on it. Batman replies with a dark frown across his face, the picture showing Ravager with her swords drawn into a wide double-bladed stance. Whoa, you guys know her real name? Cyborg demands incredulously and Batman silently nods his head while not turning around. As well as her father's real name. He's Slade Wilson, aka District the Terminator, a super assassin with a military background, and the ability to regenerate from even fatal wounds, as well as enhanced strength, speed, agility, and intelligence. Batman replies as if it were the simplest thing in the world, and Cyborg palms his face for a moment. And to think of all the nights Rob sat staring at a picture or mask of Slade, wondering who he really was, and they already know. The titanium teen thinks to himself, while Kid Flash looks from the picture to the older heroes. Are you sure it's Rose? I mean, she really isn't all that bad. He tries to say, getting looks from his friends in the Titans, while the Flash pinches the bridge of his nose for a moment. I know you're her friend Bart, but this isn't the time for that kind of thinking. She's a trained assassin, and notably insane. Not only that, but B-Man here says she used 2 rings of Azar to catch Raven once, and the only people who have been murdered thus far had rings of Azar. Thus, if anyone knew where these other guys were, it'd be her. The Flash reminds and Kid Flash mumbles something under his breath. She only got that way cause of her dad. It was Donna who heard the mumble, and she wisely chose not to mention it to the older heroes, as her friends seemed to be having enough of a bad day as it was. Besides that, she's attacked your team a great number of times already. Dr. Fate reminds the red-haired boy simply, and Starfire nods her head. Yes. Our first encounter with her was when she sent the Slade robot to attack us during Friend Raven's date. It is unknown what else she had a hand in, however I believe she may have also influenced my sister's attack on the city afterwards. And she was also the one who did the hiring of the ninja to kidnap Friend Raven, which led to her ultimately capturing of them. Starfire replies, the Flash wondering if she came with subtitles while Dr. Fate nodded his head. Exactly. Even if she is an old friend of yours, Bart, she's also a villain and a dangerous one at that. We cannot allow ourselves to be swayed by our personal feelings when the lives and safety of others is at stake. Dr. Fate reminds and Kid Flash mumbles something to himself while Batman reaches to the side and takes a disk from the Titan's computer and slips it into his utility belt. I think I have everything we'll need. Batman states simply while standing up before he, the Flash, and Dr. Fate walking around to stand behind the Titan's sofa. Further monitoring of the city will be done from the watchtower. Jason Blood will remain with you to conduct more on the scene research, and for Raven's own safety, as she is District's primary target. So until further notice, the Teen Titans are to stand down and take this time to train and rest. Batman adds while standing beside of Dr. Fate and the Flash behind the Titan's sofa. Reaching a hand up, Batman then touches the side of his ear and waits for a small noise. Watchtower, this is Batman, free to beam up. The Dark Knight states before the three older heroes vanish in a shimmer of light, thus leaving the remaining three Titans alone in the common room. So, what now? Kid Flash questions of Cyborg, and the half-machine man rubbed his face for a moment before leaning his forehead into his hands. I honestly don't know, man. The JLU is getting involved, Ray went out with Nar, Beast Boy's out with his girl, and now we have all the free time in the world. Cyborg replies and then leans back in his seat, while Donna stands up and brushes off her arms. Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm training for the next time I meet the District person. Donna states simply and makes her way out of Ops and deeper into the tower, leaving Kid Flash, Star, and Cyborg alone. I believe I shall do the cooking. Would either of you wish to do the taste of testing, friends? Starfire questions of the boys, and Kid Flash's eyes widen before he quickly tries to think of an excuse not to eat or cooking. Sorry Star, I'm gonna have to pass on that. I've got exercise to do. Yeah, can't let myself grow too weak while I'm healing up. The red-haired speedster states while grabbing his crutches, and slowly waddles his way out of the room, giving Cyborg the perfect excuse to escape as well. Yeah, and Kid Flash is going to need someone to help him around the tower. Cyborg says while lunging back to his feet and hurries to help Kid Flash, leaving Starfire alone to frown to herself, crossing her arms over her chest as she does. If they do not wish to have some of my cooking, they need only say so, I would not force them. Starfire says to herself before remembering the one time she shoved some of her food down Beast Boy's throat. Perhaps I was a bit too forceful in the past, as well as too eager. Starfire mused to herself with a slight grimace before sighing and floating over to the kitchen, at least hoping to prepare herself some kind of a meal, though admittedly she wasn't a great cook even by Tamaranian standards. Yamada no Orochimaru was actually quite enjoying his stay in this odd new world. For one thing, this world had a plethora of knowledge eons beyond any they had back in the elemental nations. Another plus, for him at least, was the many homeless drugs that tended to live on the streets, since they provided him an ample supply of test subjects for experimentation, with little likelihood of them being missed. Finally, and most importantly, in his opinion at least, no one knew who Orochimaru truly was in this world. Which in turn meant no one was looking to kill, maim, or destroy him utterly yet at least. Mentally chuckling at that thought, Orochimaru walked into a library with a mental grin. Another plus about this world was that most libraries didn't have a restricted section, and those that did were almost painfully simple for him to break into. Passing by a window, Orochimaru also liked the fact no one knew what he looked like in this world, his mini jutsu to alter his physical appearance helping that. Currently he was a fairly tan man, his now black hair was long again, but slicked back into a long ponytail, his height and build were now identical to his original form, a little chakra manipulation to his muscles and bones, having sped up the process greatly. And of course purple tribal tattoos now surrounded his yellow snake-like eyes. He is currently wearing a pair of black pants with a thin purple rope tied around his waist in the place of a belt, black boots, a grey t-shirt with a long-sleeved black undershirt. All in all, he now resembled his appearance from when he posed as an Odo Jonin during the Chunin exams in Konoha. Back to the books yet again, Mr. Ho-Ho. The librarian at the front desk questions with her brow corked upwards, and Orochimaru grins toothily. Yamada no Ho-Ho was an alias he was using in this world on the off chance Naruto, or that Haruno girl came looking for him. Yamada was due to it being his real surname, though admittedly no one knew it beyond him and the long-dead son Darime. His using the name Ho-Ho was a bit more complicated, and he really didn't think a long drawn-out explanation was needed for it. He'd heard that the name belonged to a scientist similar in actions to himself, though admittedly with even less scruples than him, and decided that the name fit with him. I'm quite fine, miss. Just doing a little more research for my experiments. Orochimaru offered to the girl curtly, using chakra to change his voice to a much higher tone, the woman mutely nodding her head while he walked past her. Orochimaru mentally chuckled to himself as he did this. His soul transfer jutsu not only took his soul with it, but also his chakra, compounding it with that of his victims. In Sasuke's case, he took a large chunk of his chakra upon leaving him. Chuckling darkly, Orochimaru walked among the many books in the library before pulling a few out. Putting them into the crook of his arm, Orochimaru walked over to a desk and sat down. He fingered his right eye for a moment, a small frown crossing over his features. The one thing he hadn't been able to replicate was his fang earring, only because it had been made from a very large snake's fang, and it wasn't even that it was something sentimental to him. He just liked to keep his general appearance the same from body to body. Shaking his head, Orochimaru decided it didn't matter for the moment while sitting down with his books. Orochimaru knew this world had no jutsu, but what it did have was a vast array of genetic augmentation and engineering. And with my knowledge of genetics from our own world, creating a way for these humans to use chakra shouldn't be too hard. Orochimaru mused to himself, having long ago studied the ins and outs of the bodies and general genetic structure of chakra wielders from his world. In fact, that's how I learned how to become a Bidyu myself. Orochimaru mused darkly, an insidious smirk crossing his lips as he continued to look over the information in the books, nearly absorbing it. His ability to change into the Yamata no Orochi wasn't an illusion of any kind, as he proved during his fight with Naruto in that form. He was actually and truly turning himself into a true Yamata no Orochi. He found a method to become a Bidyu while experimenting in his earlier days. His first use of the technique had been when he fought in the 3rd grade shinobi war. After he'd also become more snake-like, as well as more vicious and cruel. Although I truly believe little Naruto-kun will eventually learn the secret as well. Orochimaru couldn't help but think to himself while looking over his books, 3 at a time no less. In his mind, Naruto was his only true equal, not in sheer power, as Naruto and Madara were both beyond him. No, Naruto was more like his equal and his opposite. They both had wanted to become Hokage, they both betrayed their village, they both had a wind affinity, they both used swords, they both practically absorbed jutsu, they were both in a team 7, and finally, both of them were just too stubborn to die. Yes, me and Naruto-kun are just so very much alike. Orochimaru mused to himself while continuing to look over the books, his stray thoughts not bothering him. The only thing different between him and Naruto, which was that Naruto kept most of his morals somewhat intact. Sure, he very clearly bent them a great deal, but he still had them. In truth, Orochimaru could respect that about Naruto. He had an ironclad will, he never gave up or gave in, something Orochimaru admired as he had that same quality. If Orochimaru had stayed in Konoha longer, he was certain he'd have taken Naruto as his apprentice. Not like Anko, true, she was a good apprentice, but her affinity wasn't for wind, and all he could teach her was his taijutsu and snake ninjutsu. With Naruto, he could literally teach him all he knew. Every jutsu and technique would easily have been his save only for his Doton ninjutsu. This was why Orochimaru was certain, no, he was more than certain, that soon enough, Naruto himself would become a Bidyu like he himself had become, so long ago. And then, Naruto-kun, the fun will truly begin. For what fun would this new world be, if I didn't have someone to spar with on occasion? Orochimaru wondered to himself, and then shook his head while making a mental note to catch some runaway metahumans for testing. Their unique genetic structure would prove invaluable to his research. Namely, how to recreate chakra users, and then ultimately in trying to find a way to become immortal, truly immortal, like the Bidyu of legend had been, not like those pathetic shards of the Jubi. No. He would become a true immortal. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.